Chapter 6, Cost Allocation. Cost allocation and charges for services rendered can be examined from the intra-company and inter-company perspectives. So in this lecture, we will focus only on the intra-company aspect, which means inside the same company, inside the same entity. And it will cover reasons for establishment of an internal service charging system or to have a cost allocation system, techniques and principles of allocation to be used, allocation of service department costs to operating departments using the direct and step-down methods. The intercompany perspective on cost allocation and charges for services rendered could involve groups, tax planning function, could be monitored and scrutinized by tax authorities and other interested regulating bodies and agents. In general, the charge needs to be seen as an arm's length transaction to gain approval. So learning objective number 1, let's explain the major reasons for the need for allocating non-manufacturing costs. Most large organizations have both operating departments and service departments. The central purposes of the organization are carried out in the operating departments. In contrast, service departments do not directly engage in operating activities. So in this lecture we will discuss why and how service department costs are allocated to operating departments. Service department costs are charged to operating departments for a variety of reasons, including, first of all, to encourage operating departments to wisely use service department resources. Then to provide operating departments with more complete cost data for making decisions. Third, to help measure the profitability of operating departments. And fourth, to create an incentive for service departments to operate efficiently. Management and employees need to understand the full cost of providing a product or service, which includes supporting costs, to make better decisions. Ensuring competitive costing and pricing, assessment of risk and potential success of the product and service, financial and operational forecasts and planning, motivating performance evaluation and the reward system, communicating to employees about the importance of recovering all indirect costs, encouraging efficient and effective use of resources, and ensuring long-term sustainability and competitiveness. The service department charges considered can be viewed as a transfer price that is charged for services provided by service departments to operating departments, various companies within the same group. So some factors to be considered for the cost allocation approach should be considered, especially when allocating costs to operating divisions or subsidiaries within the same group. Cost-benefit evaluation involves including tangible and intangible costs and benefits, as most companies only consider tangible costs and benefits. So ignoring intangible costs such as internal fighting and inefficiency. Cause and effect. Absorption of cost based on who causes it. Benefit received. Absorption of cost on the ultimate benefactor. Ability to bear. Absorption of costs based on who or which product has the ability and profit margin to bear the cost. an important factor for group tax planning. Fairness or equity, ensuring fair game and decent profit to motive service provider. For example, use of a cost plus performance based award fee approach to ensure quality of service and So let's discuss service department charges. So in learning objective number 2, we're going to allocate costs of service departments to other operating departments using the cost behavior concept. Charging costs by behavior. So whenever possible, variable and fixed service department costs should be charged separately. Charging costs by behavior means variable service department costs should be charged to consuming departments according to whatever activity causes the incurrence of the cost. Fixed costs should be charged to consuming departments in a predetermined lump sum amount that are based on the consuming department's peak period or long-run average servicing needs. So fixed cost allocations are based on the amount of capacity each consuming department requires and should not vary from period to period. Budgeted variable and fixed service department costs rather than actual costs should be charged to operating departments. Actual costs may contain inefficiencies that should not be charged to operating departments. Variable service department costs should be charged using a predetermined rate applied to the actual services consumed. The lump sum amount of fixed costs should be based on budgeted fixed costs and not actual fixed costs. So let's look at an example of allocating costs by behavior. A company, SIPCO, has one service department called maintenance and 2 operating departments, cutting and assembly. Variable maintenance costs are budgeted at 60 cents per machine hour. Fixed maintenance costs are budgeted at $200,000 per year. Both planned and actual hours are given. We will allocate variable costs at the end of the year using actual hours. We will allocate fixed costs based on percent of peak capacity required. So variable cost allocations are made at the end of the year by multiplying the budgeted variable rate of 60 cents per machine hour by the actual hours for each operating department. Fixed service department costs are allocated to the operating departments by multiplying the percent of peak period capacity required by each department times the $200,000 of budgeted fixed costs. So let's take a quick check and see how we are doing on allocating costs by behavior. Foster City has an ambulance service that is used by the 2 public hospitals in the city. Variable ambulance costs are budgeted at $4.20 per mile. Fixed ambulance costs are budgeted at $120,000 per year. Data relating to the current year are illustrated in the table on the slide. You may want to refer back to this screen as you work through the question on the next slide. So how much ambulance service cost will be allocated to Mercy Hospital at the end of the year? Now let's go back. So how much ambulance service cost will be allocated to Mercy Hospital at the end of the year? That's the question. The way we get to this answer, we take the variable cost. Allocations are made at the end of the year by multiplying the budgeted variable rate of $4.20 per mile by the actual number of miles for each hospital. Fixed service department costs are allocated to the hospitals by multiplying the percent of peak period capacity required by each hospital times the $120,000 of budgeted fixed costs. So the total cost allocated to Mercy Hospital at the beginning of the year is $121,200. Pitfalls in allocating fixed costs. Rather than charge service department fixed costs to operating departments in a predetermined lump sum amount, some companies allocate them using a variable allocation base that fluctuates from period to period. This is a problem and a pitfall because it creates a situation where the fixed costs allocated to one operating department are heavily influenced by what happens in other operating departments. While sales dollars is a popular allocation base for service department costs, it's a poor choice usually because sales dollars fluctuate from period to period, and the costs being allocated are often largely fixed. Allocation of service departments based on sales can create a situation where the sales of one department influence the service department costs allocated to other service departments. Autos are us is an example. Let's look at this example to illustrate the pitfalls of allocating service department costs based on sales revenue. Okay, the company is Autos R Us, has one service department and 3 sales departments: new cars, used cars, and car parts. The service department costs total $80,000 for both years in this example. Contrary to good practice, Autos R Us allocates the service department costs based on sales. Let's focus on the new car sales department in this example. In the first year, sales for the new cars department are $1.5 million of the $3 million total sales. That's 50%. So we allocate the service department costs to the new cars department by multiplying 50% times $80,000. The result is $40,000. In the next year, the manager of the new cars department increases sales by $500,000. Sales in the other departments are unchanged. So let's allocate the $80,000 department costs for the second year, given the sales increase. In the second year, the sales of the new cars department are $2 million of the $3.5 million of total sales. So we take $3.5 million times 57% equals $2 million. We allocate the service department costs to the new cars department by multiplying 57% times $80,000. The result is $45,714. The allocation of service department costs to the new cars department increased by $5,714. The allocation of service department costs to the other 2 departments decreased. The new cars department manager is likely to complain because her department is being forced to bear a larger share of service department costs simply because her sales team's efforts to increase sales. So let's move on with service department allocations. Operating departments carry out the central purpose of the organization. And some of the examples of operating departments include the surgery department at Mount Sinai Hospital, the geography department at the University of Washington, the production departments at Mitsubishi Motors. Service departments do not directly engage in operating activities. They provide important services or assistance to the operating departments. Other examples of service departments include the cafeteria, internal auditing, human resources, and accounting. So let's talk about interdepartmental services and getting overhead costs. The overhead costs of the operating departments frequently include allocations of costs from service departments. So to the extent that service department costs are classified as production costs, they should be included in unit product costs and thus must be allocated to operating departments in a process costing system. The three approaches are used to allocate service department costs to other departments: the direct method, the step-down method, and the reciprocal method. Keep in mind that service departments provide services to each other as well as to operating departments. Services provided between service departments are known as interdepartmental or reciprocal services. So let's get to learning objective number 3. Allocate service department costs to operating departments using the direct method. The direct method is the simplest of the 3 cost allocation methods because it ignores the services provided by a service department to other service departments. Interactions between service departments are ignored and all the costs of each service department are allocated directly to operating departments. In this example, the company has 2 service departments, the cafeteria and the custodial, and 2 operating departments, machining and assembly. Cafeteria costs are allocated to the operating departments based on the number of employees in each department. Custodial costs are allocated to each operating department based on the number of square feet in each operating department. How much of the cafeteria and custodial costs should be allocated to each operating department using the direct method of cost allocation? Using the direct method of cost allocation, it doesn't matter which service department we allocate first. We will start with cafeteria. The total number of employees in the allocation base is 50. 20 for machining, plus 30 for assembly. Recall that we ignore the number of employees in custodial, as it is a service department, and using the direct method we only allocate to operating departments. The allocation percentage is calculated by dividing the number of employees in an operating department by the total number of employees in the allocation base. For machining, the allocation percentage is 40%. obtained by dividing 20 employees by 50 employees. Next, we multiply the allocation percentage times the service department cost. To allocate cafeteria cost to machining, we multiply 40% times $360,000 and get $144,000. Quantities of the allocation base attributed to the service costs are ignored. Now, let's allocate cafeteria costs to assembly. The allocation percentage is calculated by dividing the number of employees in an operating department by the total number of employees in the allocation base. For assembly, the allocation percentage is 60%, obtained by dividing 30 employees by 50 employees. To allocate cafeteria costs to assembly, we multiply 60% times $360,000 and get $216,000. Note that the sum of the costs assigned to assembly, $216,000, and machining, $144,000, is equal to the total costs assigned from the cafeteria, $360,000. Now, let's allocate the custodial costs. The total number of square feet in the allocation base is 75,000. 25,000 for machining plus 50,000 for assembly. Recall that we ignore the square feet in cafeteria as it is a service department, and using the direct method, we only allocate to operating departments. The allocation percentage is calculated by dividing the square feet in an operating department by the total number of square feet in the allocation base. For machining, the allocation percentage is 33 1/3%, obtained by dividing 25,000 square feet by 75,000 square feet. Next, we multiply the allocation percentage times the service department cost. To allocate custodial costs to machining, we multiply 33 1/3% times 90,000 and get 30,000. Next, let's allocate custodial costs to assembly. The total number of square feet in the allocation base is 75,000. 25,000 for machining and 50,000 for assembly. The allocation percentage is calculated by dividing the square feet in an operating department by the total number of square feet in the allocation base. For assembly, the allocation percentage is 66 2/3%, obtained by dividing 50,000 square feet by 75,000 square feet. Next, we multiply the allocation percentage times the service department cost. To allocate custodial costs to assembly, we multiply 66 2/3% times 90,000 and get $60,000. The sum of the costs assigned to assembly, $60,000, and machining, $30,000, is equal to the total costs assigned from the custodial department. Learning objective number 4. To allocate service department costs to operating departments using the step-down method. The step-down method provides for allocation of a service department's costs to other service departments as well as to operating departments. It's a sequential allocation procedure, and the sequence usually begins with the service department that provides the greatest amount of service to the other service departments. Once the service department's costs have been allocated to other departments, other service department costs are not allocated back to it. There are 3 key points to understand regarding the step-down method. In both the direct and step-down methods, any amount of the allocation base attributable to the service department whose cost is being allocated is always ignored. 2. Any amount of the allocation base that is attributable to a service department whose cost has already been allocated is ignored. 3. Each service department assigns its own costs to operating departments, plus the costs that have been allocated to it from other service departments. So let's use an example. There are 2 service departments here, cafeteria and custodial, and 2 operating departments, machining and assembly. Cafeteria costs are allocated to the operating departments based on the number of employees in each department. Custodial costs are allocated to each operating department based on the number of square feet in each operating department. How much of the cafeteria and custodial costs should be allocated to each operating department using the step-down method of cost allocation? We will allocate cafeteria first since it is larger and provides more service to custodial than custodial provides to cafeteria. The total number of employees in the allocation base is 60, 10 for custodial, 20 for machining, 30 for assembly. The allocation percentage is calculated by dividing the number of employees in a department by the total number of employees in the allocation base. For custodial, the allocation percentage is 16 2/3%, obtained by dividing 10 employees by 60 employees. Next, we multiply the allocation percentage times the service department cost. To allocate cafeteria costs to custodial, we multiply 16 2/3% times 360,000 and get $60,000. Next, let's allocate cafeteria costs to machining. The allocation percentage is calculated by dividing the number of employees in a department by the total number of employees in the allocation base. For machining, the allocation percentage is 33 1/3%, obtained by dividing 20 employees by 60 employees. Next, we multiply the allocation percentage times the service department cost. To allocate cafeteria costs to machining, we multiply 33 1/3% times 360,000 and get $120,000. Next, let's allocate cafeteria costs to assembly. The allocation percentage is calculated by dividing the number of employees in a department by the total number of employees in the allocation base. For assembly, the allocation percentage is 50%, obtained by dividing 30 employees by 60 employees. Next, we multiply the allocation percentage times the service department costs. To allocate cafeteria costs to assembly, we multiply 50% times $360,000 and get $180,000. The sum of the assigned costs, 60,000 plus 120,000 plus 180,000, equals the total cafeteria department costs of $360,000. Now we allocate custodial costs. The costs in custodial are now $150,000. This amount includes the department's own costs of $90,000 plus the $60,000 allocated from cafeteria. None of the $150,000 will be allocated back to cafeteria. How much of the custodial costs should be allocated to each operating department using the step-down method of cost allocation? total number of square feet in the allocation base is 75,000, 25,000 for machining, plus 50,000 for assembly. The allocation percentage is calculated by dividing the square feet in a department by the total number of square feet in the allocation base. For machining, the allocation percentage is 33.33%, obtained by dividing 25,000 square feet by 75,000 square feet. Next, we multiply the allocation percentage times the service department cost. To allocate custodial cost to machining, we multiply 33% times 150,000 and get $50,000. Next, let's allocate custodial costs to assembly. The total number of square feet in the allocation base is 75,000. 25,000 for machining plus 50,000 for assembly. The allocation percentage is calculated by dividing the square feet in an operating department by the total number of square feet in the allocation base. So for assembly, the allocation percentage is 66 2/3%, obtained by dividing 50,000 square feet by 75,000 square feet. Next, we multiply the allocation percentage times the service department cost. To allocate custodial costs to assembly, we multiply 66 2/3% times 150,000 and get $100,000. The sum of the costs assigned to assembly, which is $100,000, and machining, $50,000, is equal to the total costs assigned from the custodial department, $150,000. The reciprocal method gives full recognition to interdepartmental services, while the step method only allocates forward, never backwards. The reciprocal method allocates service department costs in both directions. Reciprocal allocation requires the use of simultaneous linear equations and is beyond the scope of this lecture. The reciprocal method is rarely used in practice because it's complex and because the results are usually close to the step-down method results. So here you see the information for a series of questions. The first cost allocation questions use the direct method. You probably want to use this screen as you work through the following questions. Okay. How much cost will be allocated from administration to accounting? Well, how are we going to calculate this? The total number of employees in the allocation base is 100. 20 are in accounting plus 80 in others. Recall that we ignore the number of employees in backs, as it is a service department, and using the direct method, we only allocate to operating departments. The allocation percentage is calculated by dividing the number of employees in an operating department by the total number of employees in the allocation base. For accounting, the allocation percentage is 20%, obtained by dividing 20 employees by 100 employees. Next, we multiply the allocation percentage times the service department cost. To allocate admin costs to accounting, we multiply 20% times 180,000 to get 36,000. How much total cost will be allocated from admin and backs combined to the accounting department? How do we calculate this? We allocate backs costs to accounting and add the result to the answer for the previous question. Backs is allocated on the basis of the number of personal computers in each operating department. The total number of personal computers in the allocation base is 120. 18 are for accounting plus 102 for others. the allocation percentage is calculated by dividing the number of personal computers in an operating department by the total number of personal computers in the allocation base. For accounting, the allocation percentage is 15%, obtained by dividing 18 personal computers by 120 personal computers. To allocate BAC's cost to accounting, we multiply 15% times 90,000 and get 13,500. The total amount allocated to accounting is the sum of $36,000 and $13,500 for a total of $49,500. Now we look at a question where we will use the step-down method of service department cost allocation. Here we see the same as we used in the direct methods. Here's the question, using the step-down method of service department cost allocation. And the answer? Admin provides more services than BACs, so we will allocate it first. The total number of employees in the allocation base is 105. 5 for BACs, plus 20 for accounting, plus 80 for others. The allocation percentage is calculated by dividing the number of employees in a department by the total number of employees in the allocation base. For accounting, the allocation percentage is found by dividing 20 employees by 105 employees. Next, we multiply the allocation percentage times the service department cost. To allocate admin cost to accounting, we multiply the allocation percentage times 180,000 to get 34,286. We must also allocate admin costs to BACs. The allocation method and percentage is found by dividing 5 employees by 105 employees. Next, we multiply the allocation percentage times the service department cost. To allocate admin costs to BACs, we multiply the allocation percentage times 180,000 and get 8,571. The new amount to be allocated from BACs is the original 90,000 plus 8,571 for a total of $98,571. Now we can allocate BAC's cost to accounting. For BACs, the allocation method percentage of 15% is found by dividing 18 computers by 120 computers. Next, we multiply the allocation percentage times the service department cost. To allocate BAC's cost to accounting, we multiply 15% times 98,571 and get 14,786. The total amount allocated to accounting is $49,072.